Hey, everybody, it's Richard Harris and Scott Leese with another edition of the Surf and Sales podcast. Super excited to be joined today with Jeff Riseley and I'm going to totally butcher it. So, Jeff, just tell me what it is because I don't want to screw it all up this early.
Yeah, the Sales Health Alliance.
Cool. So, I've known Jeff for a couple of months, worked on some things, some surveys with him. I know Scott has done some stuff. Um, but just from a background perspective, let people understand what the Sales Health Alliance is about and even to a certain extent where it even came from.
Yeah. So ultimately, the Sales Health Alliance, the goal is to really empower sales teams and sales leaders to reach peak levels of performance peak levels of sales performance and well-being through better mental health. And I think probably the best way I always like to talk about the Sales Health Alliance and kind of where it came from. It's born out of my own experience with mental health and my own story. I started in sales just over 10 years ago, and it was like the classic sales environment where boiler room type of sales environment where I was being measured on if I could make $200 a day, achieve 2.5 hours of talk time. If you weren't hitting your targets, you were let go pretty quickly. And that's when I was first introduced to what mental health was, and more importantly, what mental health and sales was. As a fresh grad, had no idea what anxiety was, but what I did know was I was suffering from terrible panic attacks in the middle of the night. I didn't feel like there was anyone that I could talk to within the workplace. I had really bad insomnia and anxiety. And it was after the third panic attack and that put me in the hospital where I was like, I need to start figuring out what to do here. So I went to my doctor. He prescribed me some anxiety medication and sent me on my way. Really felt like it disconnected me from my emotions when it comes to how I can be successful within sales. Picking up on those micro expressions and those buying signals that people would be giving me on a call. I lost that. I lost my emotions. And so I stopped taking the medication and I thought, what can I do to start making myself more resilient? What is mental health? And learning everything that I possibly could. And it just became like a side project of mine just to take care of myself. And fast forward to July of 2018, I was diagnosed with, just after I had launched my first sales consulting website, 3 days later, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. So it was a huge curveball. Yeah, huge curveball. But it was a huge wake up call, because what I started to realize was the same strategies that I was executing on to keep myself mentally healthy and resilient in sales, I started to navigate during this other stressful period of my life, and continue to do so as I, live this entrepreneur
So,
life and go through this pandemic.
yeah, so I want to come back to this, but let's go back
Yeah.
to that part where, I work with Scott and I've worked in a room where, 100 dials a day, 2.5 hours of talk time. Scott and I know what that's like, and we know the pressure of that. We've lived it. We were forced to teach it in
Mm-hmm.
many ways. So just from that rep perspective, like for a certain while, were you doing well at that? Were you being successful in your sales career? And, in terms of, not, I don't mean just hitting the metrics, but were you even hitting your numbers? Like, and then all of a sudden it fell out. Like, what was that like for you back in that time?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I managed to, like, on paper, I managed
Mm-hmm.
to thrive. I
Mm-hmm.
was the top rep within North America for the organization. Got flown to the head office in London, and I was crushing it. And but
Mm-hmm.
and behind the scenes, in the middle of the night, I was just like, in this terrible downward spiral. I was drinking heavily. I was like partying a crazy amount.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that I could do to get myself, find any kind of relief, I was doing in like the worst way possible. So on paper I
So
looked great, but behind the scenes
yeah,
I was not okay.
yeah. Did you? You and I know each other offline, so I'm happy to report my therapy stuff. Right. I, I said this actually yesterday to my therapist. I said, for all the times I was ignoring stuff and masking, through whatever self medication you go through, I think I always knew what was really bothering me. I just didn't want to confront it.
Mhm.
If you look back on that, you're like, yeah, I was crushing, but you were just willfully ignoring that piece of you where you had these questions. like if you look back on it now and look at yourself kind of in a petri dish, or were you unaware going through those motions for a long time that you were really ignoring those things?
Yeah, so I think there's like the first, definitely the early stages, I was totally unaware, and because I
Mm-hmm.
think these, um, there's like the common belief in sales that, like, you're supposed to go through these ups and downs, and there's this idea and this culture is talked about as it's normal, and drinking and the drinking culture surrounding sales, it's normal
Yeah,
to have these emotions. um and for sure, then as I kind of started to realize that, these coping mechanisms were not helping me live a healthy life, then I started to realize that there was some, like, buried emotional stuff that I needed to confront and face, which I was
yeah,
having a tough time doing.
yeah. What is for you? I've had panic attacks. Mine were never in the middle of the night though, and so I want to ask a little bit about it in case other people are going, "Oh, wait a
Hmm.
minute," you know, that's what I'm doing, right? What was
Yeah.
that like? Like, what were you waking up freaking out about? What life was about? Were you waking up freaking out about sales, or were you just waking up freaking out for no? In the beginning, you didn't really even know why,
It was, you just, it's like you lose perspective.
right?
Like, it starts with like a small thought of maybe thinking about an angry customer, or maybe not hitting your metrics on a specific day. And then when it happens during the day and you leave work, you're like, it's nothing to you. But then I always found at night, when I was by myself and alone with my thoughts, like that thought of missing target started to, or missing my metrics started to grow. And it became, well, what if you miss tomorrow? And what if you don't sleep and you start missing your metrics every day this week? And then what if your manager notices this and, doesn't understand and starts to say, you're on a performance improvement program, to what are your friends and family going to think if you lose your job, to losing this apartment you just moved into. And it just blew up and blew up, and this, it's like that worry loop that just puts you into a downward spiral. And for me, it was just like, it felt like I have never had a heart attack, thankfully, but it felt like I would imagine what a heart attack would feel like, where it gets to a point where your chest is just so tight that you can't breathe. And it's a really haunting and terrible experience to go through, especially in the middle of the night.
So, how do you think that sales managers, sales leadership, what have you, how do you think they should cultivate an environment where it's safe to kind of talk about the challenges that people are going through with mental health and the stress and anxiety of the job, um, while also balancing like the actual real need for productivity and production. I've tried really hard in my career to just have like open, honest conversations about all these kind of things. But I also still have to push and drive to hit particular goals. So that's a challenge, I think, for a lot of people in leadership. So what
Mhm.
are some of the things that, I know you write about this and you talk about it a lot, but like, what are some of the guidelines that you provide to sales leaders and how they can, get rid of the stigma, balance productivity with the health of their team?
Yeah, again, another great question. I think the main thing that I've noticed that sales leaders and sales cultures do is, we need to change the perspective on two things. We need to change the perspective on failure. Um, we've become a very outcome based sales culture, where the only thing that matters is if you hit your KPIs and if you hit your target. Like, it's all outcome based, and that's what's rewarded and praised. And as a result, it's putting a lot of salespeople into a fixed mindset where if they don't hit these outcomes, they take it personally. It becomes part of their identity. They're either good at sales or bad at sales based off of whether they succeed or fail. And that's, failing is a very difficult emotion for individual salespeople and sales leaders to deal with. And we need to start shifting the conversation more to exploring sales as a journey, and looking at things, prioritizing things like the effort and growth praising those types of things, the growth, learning, and effort that lead to the outcomes, rather than just caring if they hit their dials or hit their target. And looking at, failure is one of the best opportunities to learn within sales, because it's true. But if sales teams and sales reps are in this state of fear where they feel like they can't fail, the part of their brain that's responsible for learning, creativity, logical decision making, it's shut off. They're in flight or flight mode, and they just can't respond to the situation and learn.
So what is your response to people who would say, well, not everybody's built for sales. Like, that's just sales. If you can't take the pressure, get out of the kitchen, so to speak.
I think that's totally incorrect. And I think obviously there's going to be,
well, explain why you think it's
Yeah.
incorrect. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I just know that that's the devil on one shoulder, right? In this conversation is there are people out there. If the three of us posted this, or what, hell, when this goes live, like, we will all get messages that's like, oh, I don't know, man. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. Like, this is just sales. Those people are not tough enough to do the job. So I'm curious, to hear what your response is to that, the people with that voice out there in the industry.
Yeah, like I made a post about this the other day, and of an example of, I always relate it back to sports. And if you have two players, basketball players, and you both ask them to hit 18 out of 20 free throws, and for one player you say, here's your 18 out of 20 free throws, and you're standing there being like, after each shot, well, you better make it or you're done, or leaving the player totally on their own to figure it out, compared to a player that is being coached, given feedback, explained, where they can get better in terms of their form, everything that they're doing after every single shot. The second player, neither one might hit 18 out of 20 free throws, but the second player will definitely hit their free throws more consistently, and hit them much quicker. So it's going back to, like I said, praising an effort. Obviously, people are coming in with different skill sets, different raw abilities that might make them slightly better in sales, if they're more personable, if they're more extroverted versus someone that's more introverted. But with enough practice and with enough effort, and praising the learning that they're taking place every single day, and putting them in a position, rather than where they can activate the part of their brain, their prefrontal cortex, where they can learn from failure. Those are the teams, and those are the people that are going to develop and succeed. But if you're consistently operating on this, if you're operating under the belief that you either have it or you don't, then it's just going to breed a very negative, fearful driven sales culture that's going to lead to,
I'm going to jump in and
toxic outcomes.
Yeah. So it's funny because my initial response to Scott was, wait a minute, we're also going to get a ton of praise from people saying thank you for talking about this, right? And so the loudmouth jerk manager who says, oh, they can't handle it, my response is quite simply, you're just dead to me. I don't have time to convince you how wrong you are. But I also have to be willing to admit that I was that way too. Like, that's how we were conditioned. And, Scott and I just had a conversation with Dr. Richard Condi from University of Houston downtown, and he was talking about the Peter Principle that I dove into this report that he sent us, and it talks about the problem, particularly in sales, is that we promote people to skills they don't have, right? The people who are being promoted with top sales performance don't have the skills to manage, right? And I've been saying this for a year or two, that we're often promoted because we can close deals. There's nowhere in my sales training that ever existed, here's how you manage somebody, here's how you coach somebody, here's how you do something, right? So the wrong people have been promoted. And to sort of tie it all together, this is the part I love about millennials. They just ain't putting up with that shit. They just are not going to sit there and take this abuse that the old school sales managers have. And the interesting thing is, I think that old school sales manager stuff's going to get tighter. They're going to grip on harder because they don't know how to change. They're afraid to change. They're afraid to change their whole mentality. So I agree with you 100%, but
So it's one thing to talk about changing kind of what they're measured on, right? Jeff, you talked about, if it's all based on KPI attainment and goal attainment and whatnot, and Richard saying, millennials don't want to work at those kind of places anymore. So how can a company better align what you're talking about in creating the right kind of environment with goals and outcomes? What should salespeople be measured on that is growth focused and effort focused and what have you, and less kind of result driven? Have you seen, a comp plan accomplish this that makes sense? I'm curious what you've seen work and be really productive and constructive.
Yeah, so it's early days, right? Like it's like this conversation around mental health and sales is new. I'm not by any means going to say that I have all of the answers right out of the gate and say what's working and not working. But what I can say is we need to move away from treating salespeople like a number and repositioning the conversation around treating them like corporate athletes, because at the end of the day, that's really what they are. And when you have all of these, you're measuring a healthy sales pipeline of how many calls they're making, how many emails they're sending, how many demos they're booking, how much revenue they're closing. And then you have things like length of sales cycle. You have these leading and lagging indicators that sales teams are using to measure a healthy pipeline. But in reality, those are all output metrics. The input metrics are going to be, how healthy is the rep when they show up? Are they anxious? Did they sleep well? Are they feeling confident? Are they eating right? Are they exercising? And two, when they encounter a negative experience on the sales floor, do they have the EQ and the resilience training to navigate those stressful situations in a mentally healthy way? And that's where I'm prioritizing my training and my coaching around, what's happening in the brain when someone misses target or they're being micromanagement. How can you navigate that so you respond in a healthy way rather than a negative way? Like one of the things I always talk about, because the first survey that I did with you, Richard, it came back that 50% of salespeople listed micromanagement as the number one thing that impacts their mental health the most. And micromanagement to me, and how I talk about it, is it's not a bad thing, and it's just it's like a conversation that needs to change. And the way I talk about micromanagement is, ideally you want to have the manager and you want to have the rep operating in the present. But what usually happens with micromanagement is the rep encounters a negative experience, like a buyer ghosting them. They start to get anxious, so they move to the past. As a result, the sales manager is like, let's throw more training, let's throw more coaching at them. That's how we're going to get them to sell better. But that's not the fact. That's not what's actually happening. They're dealing with, rejection. They're dealing with those kind of powerful emotions that run deep. So they're stuck in the past, and the manager gets anxious and he jumps to the future, and he's worrying about his target. He's worrying about what's happening. And as a result, you have one person operating in the future, one person operating in the past, and they're trying to communicate with each other. And it just doesn't happen, because they're in totally different mindsets, totally different perspectives. So what I try to talk to sales leaders about is, that's why it's so important to foster and build that culture of trust and have those conversations around mental health. So when that rep drops to the past, he knows how to go back and talk to them, work through, let those emotions that they might be struggling with, coach them through that experience to get both people back to the present so they can continue to sell and focus on hitting their target.
That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard about micromanaging. Seriously, like that is, I can't tell you how many times as you were saying that, I'm like, yep, that happened here, 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 both to me as a rep, and then even as I was a manager. Like I did the same thing, right? And so that was fascinating. And I think it's interesting. Again, it supports a belief I've had, is that what what I call micromanagement in a lot of ways, and again, I go back to the millennials, is that they actually call that a little bit of coaching, right? What if someone sort of dove into me to talk about things and tell me how to do things, I would feel micromanaged. But the millennials are coming and saying, help me understand, tell me what I could do better in this situation, in that present moment, you know. And I think to some extent they are saying, I'm frustrated, help me with my frustration, but the sales culture focuses on sort of these output metrics that you're talking about. But I also think they're saying, coach me, help me understand why, as opposed to just go do more of this. Right. So that
it's
was really good.
thanks. Yeah, and it happens all the time, and it's just like there's just no, for whatever reason, these like fear, failure, even a new rep trying to make their first cold call on the sales floor, and that feeling so anxious about embarrassing themselves in front of all these new people that they're trying to impress. It's a lot, but there's no space on the sales floor to talk about that. And I think there's been a huge change in the last 20, 30 years. Like the nuclear family no longer really exists, where, people would go to work and then they would come home and they would at least have some supportive, family members where they could like handle and have these more honest and vulnerable conversations. But that hasn't that's been eroded. Like people are getting married later, people are digitally connecting, so they're not seeing their friends as much. There's, divorce rates are through the roof. And as a result, like people are dealing with these really difficult emotions in their personal life and in the workplace. And even when this pandemic is over, like the workplace is going to become the main stomping ground and the main place where people need to handle and have the right support to have these conversations with the people that they work with, because they can't really find them anywhere in their personal lives anymore, or it's happening less and less. So workplaces absolutely need to be prepared to start building this trust, building a community where you can be vulnerable and having these open and honest conversations with each other and have it be okay.
So let's say you're a CEO or a founder. What are some of the steps that you might be able to take to arm your department heads and VPs, with the right kind of tone and messaging and skills that can trickle on down? I mean, you're a founder right now. How are you kind of practicing what you preach, so to speak?
So I'm a founder of one right now. So there's no team for me to share with. I guess my people are the LinkedIn folks, but it goes back to however much you share will usually be reciprocated. And if you're a CEO or a founder that's, looking to have these conversations, it starts with you, because especially if you're trying to change your culture, um, starting every one-on-one or having a meeting being like, okay guys, we're talking about mental health, like who's got their stuff to share. Everyone's walls are going to be up and guarded fully. But if you start that meeting sharing an extremely vulnerable conversation, like that's what I always, when I've been doing workshops for companies in the past, the workshops that always go the best is when the sales leader that has brought me in to host them starts by sharing in as much detail and with as much emotion and vulnerability as possible, sharing their experience within sales and how it's impacted them. I've heard stories about addiction to relationship issues and how all of that stemmed from pressure that started within sales affecting their personal life. So it really comes down to the leaders becoming comfortable sharing their experiences. That's step one. And then usually that will reciprocate at some level, maybe not right away, but if you're doing it consistently. That's why I always release ebooks to help, 40 thoughts, tips, and ideas for sales teams to start talking about mental health, offering kind of talking points that teams can rely on every day to at least get comfortable, learn that skill of what it means to talk about your emotions in the workplace. And over time, if you do it consistently, you'll have more and more conversations. People learn to be open with each other.
Yeah.
What do you ever, just out of curiosity, when you do, I'm making a couple of assumptions here, but when you do talk to CEOs or leaders who are like, hey, Jeff, come in, we need your help, right? Usually by the time they have that conversation with you, 16 things have occurred, right? Not just one. What are
Mhm.
the things that people should be paying attention to that would make them go, oh, you know what, maybe we do need someone like Jeff in here to help us? Like, what are some of those things? I know you talked a little bit about seeing relationship issues or those kinds of things, but is there anything else that you could say, hey, these are the standards I'm seeing sort of universally across the board at the organizational level?
So I don't think there's one thing. Like it goes back to that whole idea of corporate athletes, um, that I think regardless of whether or not you're seeing problems in your organization or you're seeing, signs of burnout or whatever, like you should start before that. Like it's that idea that, similar to an athlete that needs to take care of their physical body to learn how to play into overtime, to learn how to, get stronger and use stress to their advantage. Salespeople have no idea how to use stress to their advantage. They're constantly stressed, but stress is used to help people grow and develop. So once you start looking at improving the input of your organization, that the well-being and the health of your reps, and giving them the training to respond to stressful situations on the sales floor, you're going to see a boost in performance. Again, it's going back to Scott's earlier point. Like, I don't have sales specific raw data on this just yet, but all of like the high level World Health Organization data that's being provided, saying things like every $1 invested into scaled up treatment for mental health issues like anxiety and burnout leads to a $4 return on increased productivity and well-being. It's like the data is there, and salespeople are measured on so many different metrics every single day, that what's really cool about this department, and why I think it's important to start with sales versus any other department in an organization, is if you can do any kind of improvement from a mental health and well-being standpoint, you should be able to catch it in a boost in some of those KPIs that salespeople are being measured on already.
I know you've done a little bit of research on this. I'd love to shift for just a minute to give some, people some practical things about burnout, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can you share with people about burnout that you've learned so far through some of the research, your own experiences, to either help them recognize, hey, I'm heading down this path, or I'm down this path, or these are some things I could actually start to do to prevent going down this path? What's your mindset around burnout these days?
Some people are in a vicious cycle
Yes.
of working their butt off, burnout, and then kind of decompress, and then work their butt off, burnout, decompress. It's hard to break that. So I would love to hear more on that part as well.
Yeah, like there's probably a full book that could be written on that topic in particular. I think something that was really powerful for myself was changing your relationship with anxiety, and that's something that I did really early on. Now, to be honest, and you might think I'm crazy, like I love my anxiety. Like my anxiety is just such an honest and transparent um, communication tool that I use, because usually anxiety flares up when you are on the edge of your comfort zone, and you're on the edge and it starts to try to pull you back to your comfort zone to say, it fills you with self-doubt. Maybe you shouldn't do this. You're going to get hurt. You're going to embarrass yourself. You're on that edge of your comfort zone. And for me, I've been able to change my perspective on that to say, thank you. Like, thank you for telling me that. Like,
it's interesting that you view it as like a dialogue and a communication. For me, my anxiety or worry about things just like fuels me. So
nice.
I would be terrified to lose some of it, because I would wonder what would happen to my motivation. Like Richard knows this about me, and if anybody knows me, they know this about me. But like, I will be without cause worried about, how am I going to survive like next month? Like I'm gonna get no deals next month. It's not gonna happen, right? And they'll be like, what are you talking about? Like, it's for sure gonna show up, right? Like you just, I could make like $1 million this month, and I'd be thinking to myself, fuck, I got like nothing coming next month. Like, I have to like grind.
We have this conversation all the time, Scott.
Yeah. I know.
We do.
I know. So like I use it as fuel, And so I think that I cling to it, right? And I don't know that that's super healthy of me. And I struggle with that.
I honestly use it as like a spidey sense that's telling me that, again, provided the culture of fear isn't there, like I like to use it as a spidey sense to be like, holy shit, I'm about to do something that's outside my comfort zone. I'm about to go for a sales target that I've never hit before. Like this is a really challenging experience. What can I learn and grow from this? And little anxiety, like inner child, I hear you, and I know you don't want me to get hurt, so you're trying to like keep me in this comfort zone. um I hear you, but this is how we are going to develop and grow and build a more meaningful life. Like some of the most meaningful experiences, like from getting diagnosed with testicular cancer, and that was like a huge wake up call for me to be like, I was 30 years old, totally healthy. I always wanted to start my own business and do like had all these dreams, and I kept saying, I'll do it in 2 years, I'll do it in 3 years, I'll do it in 5 years. Like time's not ready yet, and it's just like, no, like things can change in an instant.
Yeah.
Without you even knowing it. And learning to work with my anxiety to say there's a very meaningful experience, whether it's standing up and talking in front of people about mental health. Like I'm so grateful for getting diagnosed with cancer, because it's really helped me build this relationship and help me look for things that make me anxious, so that I can continuously seek this discomfort to grow and have a meaningful life every single day. Like even talking to you guys, you guys have huge audiences. You talk, awesome sales strategy all the time. Like 2 years ago, I'd been terrified to get on the call with you, and I probably would have avoided this situation entirely. But it's because I've learned to build that inner dialogue with my anxiety to be like, this is a really meaningful thing that can help a lot of people.
Well, 6 months ago, we would have been terrified to even have a podcast.
Do this. Right. So I do want to come back. So Scott, so this is me therapizing you. That's the word in our household, which is, I think, Scott, you're doing exactly what Jeff said. You're having that inner dialogue with yourself. You're just doing it in a different way than he's doing it. He's doing it sort of in this calm conversation. You're having that conversation internally as well as externally. And it is pushing you into this discomfort zone. And then I know when the winds come into Scott, he doesn't let the winds push him around. He just leans in harder, right? So you aren't letting that anxiety push you back to a comfort zone. You're letting that you're forcing yourself to go meet that anxiety. So it's interesting. I think you're doing the same thing. I just think you're seeing it in a different way. So, but it's interesting just to sort of hear the two different perspectives on it, because it feels like that's what a lot of people are going
also
through.
share the perspective with Jeff in terms of serious health struggle.
Yep.
And all that. I mean, I well documented, spent the better part of 4 years in the hospital struggling with autoimmune diseases and ulcerative colitis and colectomy surgery, JPAP surgery, on and on and on, and spiraling that into physical opioid addiction. And yeah, I have said many times before, like that kind of gave me a superpower, and in the ability to create urgency within myself, in the ability to not take things for granted, because like you said, Jeff, like everything can turn in an instant. And you can kind of, doesn't matter what you have, it all might be gone tomorrow type of thing. Mm-hmm. But just really also just like taking advantage of the opportunities that we have, and trying to be mindful and present and make the most of the moments and the time, and not squander and waste things. But I don't know, your health situation, but like I get literally punched in the gut, every couple months, and every couple months I have to go back to almost square one. And, you get knocked down, you get up again, right? Get knocked down, get up 10 times. But like, it's fucking exhausting when you've been dealing with like your own, sense of mortality for 20 years. And at least in the current medical situation for me, like there's no end to it as of right now. Right.
Yeah.
So the resiliency required to, you know, bounce back after health challenge after health challenge after health challenge, and knowing that there's nothing you can really do to prevent it. That's just like this whole extra level of fight that people get to. So
Yeah.
how can you cultivate that in somebody who has not been through and is not going through this type of situation? That's a question I get all the time. People are like, man, I get like why you are who you are. You've been through all that stuff, but like, I've never been through anything. So what
Yeah.
do I do? And I'm like, well, you know, don't almost die, because I don't
Yeah.
recommend that. Right.
Yeah.
How can you cultivate that level of resiliency and, you know, and fight in people who haven't gone through something as serious as testicular cancer or, you know, hospitalization and stuff?
Yeah. So so it's a tough question to answer, but I think it's spending time as a team and with salespeople to really help them define their personal why. Um, when I hear someone saying they've hit rock bottom, um, when I hear that kind of statement, I hear rock bottom as a piece of a solid foundation of all of like the shit that they've gone through that gives them the leverage to step up and start pushing against the resistance that's pushing them down. I think a personal why acts as the same thing, but it doesn't happen when you've lost very meaningful parts of your life. And for a personal why, for example, and where I'm going with this is like there's different levels. Like if you're working in sales because you want to become rich and famous, or you know, go out and buy a Lamborghini or whatever. Um, when things go wrong and you don't have those kind of external goals feeding you, like your personal why is going to crumble. Like it's not a strong foundation. If you're working in sales because of your family, you just have a newborn child that you just had and you want to create a healthy life for them, that's more meaningful. That's a stronger foundation. That's a stronger piece of mental resilience that you can push up against all the resistance you're facing every single day. But for me myself, like my personal why, that I use every day is like I've lived it. Like I know salespeople and sales leaders, I've worked as both, that are just like trapped, struggling with their mental health every single day. And I'm a solo entrepreneur at home, and there's days when I don't want to get out of bed and start, you know, continuing this mission. But what I'm pushing up against is connecting with all of that pain that everyone is feeling with, that I've personally felt, that I need to show up. Like that's my personal why that I step on every single day. And I think it's something that salespeople can really leverage when they're truly and believe in the product, and they're truly at the core connected with the pains that their individual prospects and buyers are feeling every single day. You have
Yeah,
millions of people that will bring you back to the table if you are connected and have that empathetic perspective on truly helping them.
yeah. I'll add to this too. Is that I think Scott, this is where you and I are different, right? If people come to you and say that, I think you naturally gravitate to your physical because that's the story you've shared, right? What you've gone through, and then that physical affected your mental,
Yeah.
but you gravitate to telling that story. For me, it's the opposite. It's more mental. And then what does that do to me physically, whether it's my diet or lack of exercise and those things? So for me, when people ask me those things, I'm like, well, I know you've struggled about something. And I don't mean like, to some extent, it could be I struggled because I wasn't raised with a lot or whatever, but it's not that you didn't have a lot of money. It's what did that not having a lot of money do to your mindset? And so, and I know you're good at this. You bring this out of Scott. Scott, I've seen you bring this out of people like me and a ton of other people of like, well, let's talk about something you had, challenge. You used to, pay people to quit smoking, right? I
Oh yeah.
remember this because it was a
Yeah.
waste of time. But I also know that you would talk to them to say, well, let's talk about you quitting. Like, what would be the benefit of, like, you do get into that mental piece with them. So I see that. Um, we've got to sort of shift this towards the end. 'Cause we've got some other stuff we're focusing on, but one of the things we love to do, Jeff, at the end is turn around and just say, how can we help you? Obviously, we're getting the word out. We certainly want you to give the name of the website, let people know what reports you have, because there's something else we can do to help you. specifically, whether it's individually or for your organization.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and having this conversation has been extremely beneficial. So if people are looking for more kind of helpful resources around mental health and sales, you can go to saleshealthalliance.com. I've got all sorts of free resources there as well, like ebooks and a gratitude journal. Pre-COVID-19, I was leading half day and full day workshop sessions for organizations to help create awareness and help tackle some of those trigger events that salespeople will deal with on a day-to-day basis. But obviously, in person is currently put on hold. But going forward in about 2 or 3 weeks, I'll have my first online course finished, where I've repositioned all of my content into a scalable online course that salespeople and sales leaders can take. To again start those conversations and go more in depth to some of the topics that we talked about today, about failure in sales. How do you change that perspective and that relationship that you have with anxiety, and how do you kind of start to understand how anxiety or depression manifests in your own body, so that you can become more aware of the warning signs, not only individually but also as a team. So that's the big one that I'm pumped for. It's the online course. I can't wait to share it.
I was going to say,
on getting that out there.
Yeah, I was going to say, if people have sat and listened to this and gone, wow, this was really good, this is fantastic, and then you're going, well, I don't know if this would go well online, you're completely missing the boat because you just sat through this thing, listening to Jeff share these amazing stories. And if you're so riveted by this conversation, like I know Scott and I are, and just listening to Jeff, absolutely this stuff will work online. Absolutely this stuff can be done virtually. Just speaking from my own experience, I've done.
Oh, you muted yourself there, Richard.
Sorry. I've been saying that I've been doing therapy for years, and I've done FaceTime therapy for years, and now all of a sudden it's the norm. So, for those who are really thinking about this and wondering if it'll work, I guarantee you it will still come across well online as much as it would in person. So
my mental health is better just from
Jeff, thank you.
Jeff talk. Jeff just got
That's what I think. Like his tone of voice, his
radio
pace.
voice. It's like you should
Yes.
you should like do voiceovers for the Headspace app or something like that.
Wow.
Yes,
I got this
totally.
got this mic a few weeks ago just for this online course, so I'm
not
glad it's
mic,
working
Jeff.
out.
It's not the mic.
Not the mic.
Yeah, it's you. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for spending some time with us.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
This was
to create
awesome,
awareness.
Jeff.
Appreciate this so much.
Sure.
Yeah.